Hello, everyone. It is Professor G again. Hopefully, at this point, everyone got a chance to watch the first video in the series, which is about why quoting even matters. Who cares about whether we can quote in a paper? And my answer to that was that as we are practicing quoting, what we're really practicing, what we're really working on is listening to another human being, right? And showing that we care about their thoughts and also that we can contribute to the conversation. We can add to something. So in this video, instead of talking about the why, I'm going to talk about the how. So once we are committed to the idea that working quotes into our papers is a worthwhile and important thing to work on, so once we've committed to that, we need to try to figure out how, right? And the basic rule is this. Whenever we use a quote, we should structure that use so that we are highlighting our own contribution. All right, so what I mean by that is that when we include someone else's words in our paper, that involves a lot of trust, right? And the trust is in our ability to use them and to contribute to the conversation. If we cannot contribute to the conversation of which that quote, those words are a part, then they shouldn't be there. All right, so that's the basic rule, that when you use a quote, the focus is on your contribution to the conversation, not only on their contribution. You want it to be a little bit selfish, right? And this is part of listening too, right? That we want to show that we are listening to them, but also add something to the conversation. All right, so if that is true, if our use of quotes should highlight our own contribution, that actually brings us to a bunch of different ideas about where we should place that quote. Now, my first tip for everyone is going to be, once you are set on working a quote into your paper, really think about where that quote should be positioned. All right, that quote should not be positioned in a place where your voice should be, right? And that follows naturally from this idea that any use of a quote in a paper should highlight our own idea. All right, so if that is true, and we should not have a quote where our own idea should be, this is what that means. That means that there should never, ever be a quote in a thesis statement. A thesis statement is our idea. It is our argument. It is our intellectual baby. All right. So we should not have someone else's intellectual baby in there. That is their thing. That's their idea. Right. So if you have a quote in a thesis statement, get it out of there. Right. Someone has already owned that idea. Cannot be yours. Yours has to be a different contribution. Right. It's all about highlighting our own contribution. All right, second offshoot of this idea, a quote should never be in a topic sentence of a paragraph, right? So in a body paragraph, that first sentence announces your own idea, right? It gives some little nugget that is attached to your overall idea. So that is all you. That topic sentence should be all you all the time. So don't have a quote in there. Again, someone else's intellectual baby. You cannot have them. They own it. So that first sentence of that body paragraph should be yours, should not be a quote. Get it out of there. All right, a third offshoot of this, and I know that some of us may be made uncomfortable by this because we're getting rid of some placement, some possible placements for it. The end of a body paragraph in a paper. If you have a body paragraph, one of my biggest recommendations for you is to begin and end that body paragraph in your own voice. That's going to allow you to hold on to your own idea, hold on to your own perspective. So that means quote should not be in a topic sentence, should also not be at the end of the paragraph. And that actually makes sense because if we put a quote at the end of the paragraph, this is what we have to do, right? We write our own body paragraph, we get to the end, we include a quote, then we go to the next paragraph. So we're going into a new topic sentence. So we can't actually, it feels forced if we go back and analyze that quote. All right, so having a quote at the end of the body paragraph leads you into a problem. I would say don't do it, right? So again, begin and end every body paragraph in your own voice. And what I will say now is that the closer you can get that quote to the middle of the body paragraph, the better, right? Because that allows you to work it into your paper in a way that highlights your own contribution. All right, and that's always the goal. That's always the rule. All right, so the other thing I want to talk about is a little bit more nitty gritty. All right, so once you have that quote, once you know where you want to put it, now we have all these questions about how to put it there. All right, there's a very simple form that I highly recommend that is very, very open. It actually is just kind of a general recommendation. It's not even really a form, but it's called the quote sandwich. And you can find information about this online. It's very easily Googleable or, Bingable, whatever search engine you use. All right, so the quote sandwich is 3 steps. Step number 1, set up the quote. Say where it's from. It's someone else's idea, someone else's intellectual baby that came out of their head and onto the page. Or, through their mouths, right? If it's a spoken quote. So, let us know who it's from, what the context is, right? And you can be fast about this, right? It can be in a phrase, it could be in a full sentence, and it could be a little phrase and a colon. There are different ways to kind of structure it, but basically, give us the setup. All right, step number 2, give us the quote, give us the language. Paraphrasing is a very useful skill. However, it is also a trap because if you get too used to paraphrasing, it actually gets really hard to analyze in a way that is convincing because a reader can come in and always have issues with your paraphrasing. That's actually really, really common. So nothing is as convincing as giving the words on the page and then working with them. All right, so step number 2, again, was provide the quote. Step number 3, analyze the quote, work with the quote, have some follow-up. And that follow-up, at least from my perspectives, my perspective, should not just be a paraphrase. Again, the golden standard here is to structure any use of a quote in a way that highlights our own contributions. So in the follow-up, have your contribution in there. And there are different ways to do this, right? One way of doing this is to pick some word, some phrase from the quote that you can use to your own advantage, right? This is a way of proving that we are listening, that we're really thinking about it. All right, so that's one way of doing it, right? Using the language of the quote to our own advantage. Another way of doing it is to agree with the quote, but add something. The agreeing is simply paraphrasing. It's simply saying that's an idea created by someone else. But when you do the I agree and blank, what you do is you open up this possibility of contributing to the conversation rather than just identifying that that conversation is there. All right. Another way of showing our contribution is to disagree, right? To push against that quote. That is perfectly legitimate, right? But if you disagree, it has to be, I disagree because, right? You have to give that backup and you have to give something that is convincing, that shows that you are not just dismissing their quote, their words, because again, that violates the rules of conversation, right? So instead of just saying you disagree, say that you disagree, but give a reason to it. All right. So another way of showing our contribution is to focus on what that quote misses, right? This is a kind of in-between route so that you don't need to really say I agree or I disagree. It just says something along the lines of what this quote, what this idea leaves out is blank. And that allows you to not so much disagree or agree, but to take a different perspective, to take a different spin, right? And so those are a couple of very quick ways that you can show your contribution to the conversation. All right, so again, one of the most important things that we can think about when using a quote is to really consider where it should be placed, right? Don't put it in a spot that should be your own voice. And also, with any quote, you have to justify including it. You could have chosen any quote from the material. Why did you choose that specific one? Prove that you are thinking about all the options. And also, and this goes back to the first video, prove that you are listening to that writer's idea. All right, that is the end of this video. That is the end of this series. I hope that this was helpful in terms of thinking about why we should focus on quoting and how to do it in a sympathetic way, and also how we can do it in a very kind of nitty-gritty, bare bones way.